You have the ring. And I see your Schwartz is as big as mine. Now let's see how well you handle it.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. And I'm going to admit, I'm confused. What came first, the 5G or the future state? We keep hearing that DC 5G is dead, and then it keeps sounding like it's a lie. I'm confused. How about you, Perch? Are you confused?
I mean, it is. It's the shuffling of marketing. So I mean, the problem with this whole story is where it originated. If it hadn't originated as this clickbait news bit, I think it would all make a lot more sense to us. But the fact that it went through that whole cycle, it means everything is screwed up.
Yeah. So obviously, joining me to talk about this is Perch from Comics by Perch today. Now, Perch, you have two girls, right?
I do. Yes, I do.
I'm going to share a little dad story, maybe a little dad humor. So my son is 5 years old, and my wife laments the fact that we cannot get him to eat more vegetables and fruits.
Yeah, a big problem.
So I go next door where his Lola and Lola are, obviously his grandparents. And I go over there, and when he answers the door, he's got a banana peel in his hand. Obviously, I'm excited. I'm going to bring him back. I'm going to show Mom the big success. She's going to be happy. I said, Kuya Brett, did you eat that banana? He said, no. I said, what do you do with the peel? He said, I'm wearing it as a hat.
That fits this topic too, in some weird way.
He's like, okay, I guess it makes sense. So obviously, if you're coming around and you haven't subscribe to Thinking Critical YouTube, hit the bell for notifications. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoy this. Give us a thumbs down if you don't. Either way, Perch and I will be reading your feedback in the comments section. We can't wait to hear about it. Do you have weird stories about your kids wearing banana peels as hats?
Yeah, I don't, but I mean, yeah, put in the comments, folks. If you're hearing about that, definitely get that in there. I think, I mean, every parent has problems with people eating their vegetables, and you get into weird scenarios, and it does feel like a good analogy for DC future state of wearing garbage on our heads.
It's so weird. So, like we've been covering, then all of a sudden it seemed like, okay, your Generation 5 is no longer going to be an event. It's going to be an imprint. Then it's like it's not going to really be even an imprint. It's going to be a couple of comics, and then we're going away from it. Obviously, that was what Jim Lee said at DC Fandom. And now we get this future state. Now, when I saw the name of the event, Perch, I thought, this is cool. DC are going to do like maybe 4 issues, and they're going to introduce the new creative teams and the directions for like Flash, Superman, Justice League, a slew of their kind of bigger characters. I figured Green Lantern would be in here. Mm-hmm. We know that run is wrapping up. Is that what you thought when you saw the name?
Well, I got introduced to it in a different way. So I was told that, they're still looking for the scraps of the work that are being commissioned with the Generations event. Obviously, we had the Detective Comics piece coming. So I heard something was coming, and then I heard that, it's going to be Future State. And I remember having the same thought you did, which was, hey, this would be a great initiative to kick off the new creative teams and make some buzz about it. But apparently it's going to be tagged to this kind of convergence-like 2-month event that is going to be the remnants of the Generations work, which, I don't know, it feels like a bit of a letdown.
Yeah, and it almost feels like it goes directly against what Jim Lee was saying. He says, if you're waiting for the big developments in the DC universe, the big ones are in 21 across the board. It's spread out and approached organically. This doesn't feel like that at all. When it makes sense with a particular title, we'll do a big epic event all at once. That's not what's happening here. And he also said, we didn't want to take the focus off of our titles and renumber for a month or two just to go back to where we are, which it feels like this is what we're doing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, a bit. So I think, as we sift through all this, the biggest thing this feels like to me is that somebody at DC spent some money to get a bunch of pages drawn and get some work commissioned. And now we've got to use that somehow. We've got to make that money that we spent, make something count. And it really does feel like how Convergence felt coming into things, where it was a lot of very confusing stories about what was going on, why it was happening, who was doing what. And as it turned out, it was more or less just a filler event to bridge them from one place to another where they were short on some work. And that was what Convergence wound up being. And it wound up being an Earth 2 event, which really wasn't what anybody was sold. And so now we have this Future State event, 2 months, a handful of issues. And we've seen the DC do this a couple times now. I mean, they did the whole the Justice League storyline that we're getting, the Endless Winter.
Endless Winter, yes. It's another filler story arc where it's like they don't have comics for those titles. They're doing this weird filler story arc with the same 2 writers with different artists on each book.
Right. And it's going to happen all within a month. And there's this mishmash of kind of issues in a series run where they've got holes, and then just new #1 issues where there's already something planned for that issue. And it feels very hacked together. And so Future State has a similar feel. Now, what I've been told, now we'll see if this turns out to be true or not. I don't know. What we're told is if you remember Avengers Forever and you remember the concept of multiple characters pulled through the timeline all together into one team to fight some kind of threat, that is basically what we're getting here. Now, I heard this some time ago and kind of blew it off as, I don't know why they would do that at this particular juncture. And then that Detective Comics issue came out this week, where Kamandi basically pulls a time displaced kind of World War II-ish Batman to some unknown place, which certainly read like a gathering of heroes to fight some future threat. So apparently, maybe that's the best way we look at this. This is DC's version of Avengers Forever.
Well, Avengers Forever is actually pretty good.
I love that. I love Avengers Forever. I don't know that I want to see DC replicate it, but hey, if that's the goal here, is to celebrate the different generations of DC's history and legacy by having different versions of the characters all come together, be in one place at one time where they normally couldn't be, and do something incredible. It's kind of a celebration of DC. Cool. Why you would do this kind of right after Death Metal with all the confusion went on over 5G, where you've got a bunch of creators that are in theory going to be starting in January and February, who knows? But I think the biggest way to look at this is just like Convergence was buying time for 2 months, this appears to buying time for 2 months.
It's interesting. I read an interview with Jeff Johns about DC Comics Rebirth, and he was talking about how they had brought in a bunch of people from the media. They wanted to show them some of the work that was going to come out in DC Comics Rebirth. And one of them came up to him and said, "Which Wally West is this? I don't recognize exactly where this takes place." And he said, "It doesn't matter. We're taking the very best of each one of our characters, and that is the version of the character that you're going to get in DC Rebirth." Yeah. So didn't they technically already do this, kind of? Sort of?
I mean, I think didn't they technically already do this is going to sum up a lot of this event from a number of different things. I mean, it just has this kind of feel to it. I think that thankfully, I don't hear a lot of people losing their minds anymore about G5 and kind of the wokeness, or maybe I'm just listening to different channels, but it feels like everybody's exhausted at this point over all of it. And I think as we've seen with Endless Winter, as we've seen with other things, it's just one more little 8-week thing that's going to roll out, and hopefully there's a good story in there. But the track record when DC does this kind of stuff has not been great. And if Endless Winter is a bit of a in December dud, and Death Metal doesn't just end on a huge note, rolling into another one of these is going to. I mean, you and I talked a couple months ago about the momentum that DC had, and these things all feel like slowing that momentum. It doesn't feel like it's ideologically one way or another. It just doesn't feel thrilling, and but it's too early to say. Again, if they can pull off an Avengers Forever like cool event with really iconic versions of the different characters coming together, doing something cool, maybe setting up a future threat, awesome. I actually would, that could be great. The odds of them doing that, pretty low, I think, but we'll see.
I tend to agree with you. Let's go back to the Detective Comics 1027. I reviewed that on the channel with Dylan from the Real Comic Book Gamer. There's a couple of gems in there, but for the most part, that was a lot of mediocrity. And the Generations, is it Fractured? I think it's the Generations Fractured story from Dan Jurgens in there. Mm-hmm. I found it woefully disappointing. It wasn't even a comic story. Even within an anthology, you get more abbreviated stories, but there was no beginning, middle, end. It was a scene from a comic, and it said continued in Generations Future State. And I remember saying to Dylan, I was like, if that's what Future State is, I don't want to read this because that was boring. Like, it was not exciting at all to me. What was your reaction to that story?
Yeah, I mean, that issue in general. I mean, I think that comic, like, or that issue, that story in that issue, it felt like we've seen just too many of these 80-page, $10 anniversary books. It felt like I've read this before, and as I'm going through it felt old. There's a couple pages of story and some moments that were not a whole lot's happening in most of the stories. There's two stories I enjoyed, but generally the whole feeling was not that they were bad, just kind of dull,
Very average.
Yeah, very, very average, which is not what you hope for with an anniversary issue, and it's not how all the anniversary issues have felt. It's just there's been so many of them over the last 2 years. They've just crammed them out, and as we look at November and December, we're getting more. So it starts to feel like the same old idea over and over again. And so then we get to this particular story, and it definitely felt like something that was commissioned for some other comic where they were doing some generational stories. And again, it was hard to read that and feel a consequence out of it. It was hard to feel like, hey, we're going to get something. And there's been stories I've loved and stories I've hated, but over the last year, there's been quite a few stories coming out of DC where it ends with some kind of, hey, we solved the threat, but now there's a bigger threat. Let's go. We saw it with Flash Forward, a comic I really enjoyed, but that was, we'll see you in another threat. And the next time we saw Wally West, who has this godlike power, he's imprisoned and for some weird reason with Wonder Woman and Death Metal. And so it's like, all right, so what was the payoff? You're always left feeling like you're missing something, but you don't really care enough to go find it. And that's
it's interesting. I almost call it like the Marvelcation of the DC Comics universe, where now in December we're getting this 9-issue endless winter story arc that feels exceptionally inconsequential. Moving into January, February, we're having this Future State comic book where they're rehashing ideas. Not a lot original here. If this is the preview to it, it's probably just leading into another event. And it doesn't feel like anything's important. Like you said, there's no consequences to any of it because it's just a segue into whatever the next cash grab is. And I'm all for making cash.
No, you just as a reader, you don't want to feel like that's what's happening. You want to happily give them your cash because you're entertained, and then you want them to be rich because they made your life rich. So but it is the challenge, and I think Marvel's gotten worse lately, and I think you're right. I think DC's got some of that going on right now, where it's just there's no room to catch your breath, and unfortunately, when you've got a new cataclysmic, the world may be over and nothing will be the same again, and you can't miss this. It's incredible. When you have that every 30 to 60 days, none of them matter anymore. And I mean, over in Marvel, you had Empire. Things will never be the same again in space. But, things are going to be the same. It's all right. And then we roll into Ten of Swords, and then we roll into Last Rites, and then we roll into the Avengers Phoenix Tournament, and then we roll into Kingdom Black. And they all are billing, you can't believe what's going to happen. It's going to blow your mind. And DC, unfortunately, I think DC had a better handle on this, where they didn't stack it up so much that, you were basically, you didn't want to wait for the end of this story because you're already getting hyped for the next story. But unfortunately, this last 3 or 4 weeks with DC has really piled it all up in November, December, January of, you got Death Metal, and by the way, there's a Joker War, and by the way, we've got Endless Winter, and here comes Future State, and oh, by the way, Bendis is ending his run, and who knows what's going to happen, and there's a whole new creative team coming on. And at some point, readers are like, you know what? I'm going to sit back, and you call me when things calm down. Exactly. I'm out. I'm just, you let me know when you have a stable person on a run again, if you want to advertise that Josh Williamson is going to do a 50-issue run on some comic, you just let me know what that comic is, and I'll show up. But until then, I'm out. That's what it feels like.
I'm still excited about DC characters. As me personally, I'm a DC guy. I know you're more of a Marvel guy. Obviously we like both companies. I still like DC characters. I still think DC has the superior creative teams as far as the writers and artists and things like that. But it doesn't feel like they're showcasing that.
No, and I think both companies they've got the same kind of problem going on. And I think that the optimistic view of this is simply this: you can get a good run showing up out of nowhere, and suddenly you're enthused again. When Hickman came in and did House of X, Powers of 10, the month before, it was one of the worst X-Men comics I've ever read. And yet 30 days later, I've got huge confidence in the run again. So as much as things seem bad and negative, all it takes is, you could say, hey, Venditti is
Robert Venditti's on Superman. Joshua Williams, the new Green Lantern writer.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Joshua Williams, the new Green Lantern writer. He's got some great stuff. He's being joined by these two artists that are pretty cool. Ivan Rice is going to be on there with him, and we're going to get an iconic 20, 30 issue run out of those guys. Get ready. We'd be all hyped immediately. Mm-hmm. And so I think that the thing that seems to be surprising to me about DC is it felt like for a long time they understood that if you put creators who people have some confidence in, and you announce that, people get hyped about a run, and they get hyped about that comic. And Marvel was always the one that seemed to want to lead with the event more and lead with you won't believe that this is going to happen, and almost forget that they've got creators that can bring people to the table that do get people excited. It seems like DC, like I said, is now kind of copying that Marvel run of, hey, we'll tell you about the creators later, but for now, Future State, Endless Winter. Well, don't you want those things? Sure you do. And it's like, you know what? All we really want to do is just hear that somebody awesome is going to be on a title, and then we will blow our money with you. You will get rich. We will be happy. That's it.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. I hope they don't start doing like the, two creators on one event idea. That is that's terrible at Marvel.
No, that's the worst. So to kind of bring it back a little bit, I mean, Future State, it's 2 months. It's clearly not going to be the entire DC universe is going to be transformed into some new and crazy diverse bit of nonsense. It's going to, the core characters are core characters. We're getting some miniseries. We're getting some, different kind of views of the future. Fine. I do expect that Future State will be a handful of issues. I don't think it's going to shut DC down. You're still going to get, plenty of titles that you know and love in January and February.
I assume it's going to be like Endless Winter, like maybe 9 each month.
I would assume that, or less. I would assume less, actually.
Yeah.
And I think, you're still going to have plenty of titles during that month that will probably be great. And I think some of the creators that we've talked about, Williamson and Venditti and others, and Tomasi, and they'll be on comics in January and February, and we'll probably love those. So I think, that's what I'm looking forward to, and I'm sure DC will deliver then.
But DC, shit or get off the pot with Generation 5. This feels like you're repackaging it. Either you want to do it or you don't.
I think that they need to. I think they need to be a little bit more. I mean, Jim Lee did win a little bit of the way by saying, "Look, the reporting was always wrong, and we're not going to do that." I think he needs to go a little bit further and just tell us how it was wrong at this point. Say, "Look, we were never going to cancel all the main titles and do this. We were toying around with a miniseries, or we were toying around with an event, or we were going to show some future version like the Avengers Next, where you'd see different versions of those characters." We were going to do a storyline like that. Obviously, things got screwed up because of Didio going and everything else, so we couldn't do it. Just come out and give us that detail, because otherwise, you're still fighting the shadow of whatever kind of goofy thing Bleeding Cool mentioned, a year ago, and it's screwing up your own marketing. It's confusing.
It feels like they're repackaging the same thing and trying to sell you something else. It's like just
tell us what's going on.
Yeah, that's what I say, but.
Anyway, yeah, like I said, I'm sure there'll be some good comics. I'm sure this will be a filler. Who knows? Again, Avengers Forever for DC. Make it work. I'd love to read it. Make it work.
Yeah, just give some details and stuff like that. But we shall see. Obviously, Perch, like I said, it does feel like DC's taking a few plays out of the Marvel marketing playbook. Hopefully, this is a short-term thing, and they go back to doing what DC does best, which is big-time world building with great creators and great characters, which is what they excel at. So that's what I'm hoping for. We shall see. The future is ahead of us, but we cannot actually tell what's going to happen. I do appreciate you for coming on the channel. If you want to subscribe to Perch's channel, he's got a great YouTube channel, talks about comic books 2 to 3 times a day on his channel with videos. There's a link in the video description. There's also an opportunity. There's going to be a button with the Comics by Perch logo on it. You select that, you can go subscribe to his channel that way through YouTube, and buddy, I really appreciate it. I know you've been busy. Hopefully you'll be able to clear the decks and we can talk about some more comics this week.
That would be great. Looking forward to it.